The warm, honeyed light of a late May evening spilled across the master bedroom, painting everything in a deceptive, sentimental glow. Vesper Vance stood in the doorway, a silent statue amidst the settling dust motes, watching the methodical destruction of her life. Her husband, Lucian, arranged dress shirts in his suitcase with a meticulous, surgical precision that felt more violent than any slammed door or shouted curse. Each fold was crisp, each placement deliberate, as if he were packing for a prestigious business summit in Tokyo, not meticulously dismantling 12 years of shared history. The scene was so ordinary, so domestic, and yet it vibrated with a brutal finality that made the air in the room feel thin and toxic. Outside, the city hummed with the promise of a lazy weekend for families, for couples, for people whose worlds weren't being systematically boxed up and zipped away. "Lucian," she called out, her voice a soft thread of sound, yet underpinned by a strange newfound firmness that surprised even her. "Are you really leaving?" He didn't turn. His shoulders, broad and familiar in the tailored shirt she'd ironed just yesterday, remained rigidly facing the closet. He continued his task, every movement saturated with an indifference that cut deeper than any explicit hatred. It was the absence of feeling, the erasure of her from his emotional landscape that was the true weapon. "Vesper, we've already discussed this," he replied, the words tossed over his shoulder like discarded wrapping paper. "Don't make a scene. I've made my decision. We've talked about it." She stepped into the room, the plush carpet muffling her footsteps, and leaned against the doorframe, needing its solidity. "Yesterday, you announced you have another woman. That isn't talking, Lucian." Finally, he turned. Lucian Vance, 36, owner of a boutique construction firm that was his pride and obsession, he was objectively handsome, with sharp, clean features that had once softened with love for her and now were set in lines of cold impatience. His gaze, which could once spark with ambition or warmth, was now a flat Arctic gray. "Fine," he said, the word a sigh of exasperation. "Let's speak honestly then." He zipped the suitcase shut with a definitive rasp and sat on the edge of their king-size bed, the same bed where they'd conceived their son, where they'd whispered dreams in the dark. "Saskia Sterling is a serious woman. She has capital, connections, potential. She'll help me level up, expand the business, land the big government contracts. She has the most influential clients in the city. She moves in certain circles. Do you understand? It's my opportunity." The name landed in the room like a physical blow. Saskia Sterling. Vesper had known that name, silently, fearfully, for 3 months. Owner of a chain of high-end med spas, 40-something, divorced, with a fortune polished to a high shine and a reputation as a woman who acquired what she wanted with the ruthlessness of a collector. "And me?" Vesper asked, her voice barely a whisper, the air squeezed from her lungs. "And Langston? Your son is 10 years old." Lucian shrugged, a gesture so casual it was obscene, as if they were discussing the disposal of an old sofa. "Langston will stay with you. I'll pay child support. Everything according to the law." "According to what law?" The question burst from her, fueled by a sudden, dizzying rage. She took a step toward him. "The condo is in your name, the business too. I don't even have a bank account of my own. You've controlled everything these past years." A smug, self-satisfied smile touched Lucian's lips, a smile so devoid of warmth it was a predator's grin. Seeing it, she had to physically restrain herself from crossing the room and slapping it off his face. "Exactly, Vesper," he said, the smugness dripping from each syllable. "I've thought of everything. The condo is mine. I bought it before we got married, remember? I built the company. You didn't participate. You're a housewife who dedicated herself to the boy. You'll get the support checks for Langston. You'll rent a cheap studio in some modest neighborhood. You'll survive." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. Where was the man who 12 years ago in a sun-dappled garden had sworn eternal love with tears in his eyes, the one who wept with unbridled joy clutching her hand when Langston took his first breath? "So you're just going to leave now?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with weakness now, but with the sheer force of emotion she was battling to contain. "Yes," he nodded, standing up and grabbing the suitcase handle. "Saskia is waiting for me. She has a mansion in a gated community in Buckhead. Next month we're going to the Cayman Islands. She already found a villa there. Vesper, understand this well. It's not personal. I just have a right to a better life." Vesper closed her eyes for a moment, a fleeting darkness against the visual assault of his betrayal. Inside her, a storm was brewing, a cataclysm of rage, of soul-deep pain, of sheer terror for the future she and her son faced. But beneath that turbulent surface, something else was stirring, something cold and crystalline and calculating that had been awakening in the back of her mind for months. It was the quiet, patient part of her that had watched him grow distant, that had noted the late nights and new cologne, that had secretly gathered information during his showers, that had made furtive, heart-pounding trips to consult with attorney Octavia Thorne, and had spent lonely evenings studying the complex, damning documents she'd copied from his home office safe. She opened her eyes, and the storm was now hidden behind a placid, unnerving calm. "Lucian," she said, her voice steady, almost gentle, "stay at least one night." He was already heading for the door with suitcase in hand, but her words, their unexpected tone, made him stop. "What? Stay this last night?" Vesper repeated, weaving a thread of pleading into her calm. "Tomorrow you can leave forever if you want, but today let's have a farewell dinner, like civilized people. 12 years together means something, doesn't it?" He watched her, suspicion narrowing his eyes. But then his face softened, his posture relaxed. Lucian saw what he wanted to see, the glint of what he mistook as resignation in her eyes. He thought she had yielded, that this was her final, pathetic bid for compassion, a plea for a graceful exit, or perhaps a last-ditch effort to change his mind. He saw the obedient wife resigned to her fate. "All right," he conceded, the magnanimous victor, leaving the suitcase leaning against the wall. "One night, but tomorrow morning I'm leaving, and no tears. Agreed." "Agreed," she nodded, offering a small, strange smile. If he had paid closer attention, he would have seen something unsettling flicker within it, a spark of something far removed from surrender. But he didn't. He only saw compliance. "I'll prepare your favorites," she said, turning toward the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Smothered pot roast with root vegetables, and I'll open that vintage Cabernet we were saving for a special occasion. It's supposed to be one, right?" "Don't be ironic, Vesper," he grunted, though a hint of pleasure at her continued docility was evident. "Fine, I'll take a shower. I'll call Saskia to tell her I'm coming tomorrow." The kitchen became her war room. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory from 1,000 family dinners, but her mind was a fortress of crystalline focus. She took out the marbled chuck roast, the carrots, the parsnips, the herbs. She turned on the oven, the preheating element glowing a fierce orange. She was not preparing a meal. She was setting a stage, laying the groundwork for an execution. While the water ran in the master bathroom, she slipped into his home office. Her fingers, steady and sure, spun the dial of the wall safe. She had known the combination for years, their anniversary, backwards, a sentimental security he'd never bothered to change. The copies of the documents, the financial statements, the shell company incorporation papers, the transfers to an account in the Caymans had been made a week ago and were already in Octavia Thorne's possession. Only the final, most dangerous act of the plan remained. She returned to the kitchen just as Lucian emerged, damp-haired and relaxed in soft sweatpants and a t-shirt, smelling of his expensive sandalwood soap. He looked content, almost benevolent in his victory. He settled on the balcony with a cigarette, a habit he'd quit 3 times. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, Vesper informed him, her voice a model of wifely efficiency as she stirred the rich gravy. "Let's set the table in the dining room." "Actually, no," he called back, taking a drag. "Here, in the kitchen. More homey." "Homely," Vesper smiled to herself, a thin, private curve of her lips. "Perfect. The intimate, confined space of the kitchen would make everything easier." Their son, Langston, was safely at her mother's house, spared this ugly scene. Lucian returned from the balcony and sat at the oak table, a king holding court. Vesper served him a steaming plate, the aroma of the meal she'd perfected over years now feeling like a funeral offering. She brought the bottle of expensive red, a gift from a satisfied client years prior. "Shall we toast to something?" he asked with a condescending air as she filled their glasses. "To new beginnings," Vesper replied, her serenity unnerving. "To your new life. May you receive everything you deserve." He missed the double meaning entirely, clinking his glass carelessly against hers before taking a large, appreciative gulp. "Excellent," he nodded. "A pity we didn't open it sooner." "Yes," she echoed, her voice flat. "A pity." She barely sipped hers, her eyes tracking his as he drank with gusto, the alcohol beginning to soften the hard edges of his arrogance. She guided the conversation with the skill of a seasoned therapist, asking about his plans, the business, Saskia's world. Flattered, he opened up like a flower in the sun, his tongue loosened by the wine and his own sense of triumph. He bragged, his words slurring slightly, about the legal fortress he'd built, how he'd moved company assets through a labyrinth of shell corporations, how he'd meticulously ensured the condo was solely in his name, despite the down payment coming from Vesper's ailing mother. "In business, you have to think one step ahead, Vesper," he lectured, pouring himself a third generous glass. The rich liquid glinted like blood in the soft kitchen light. "I always calculated the risks. Even when we got married, I thought, what if something goes wrong? You have to protect yourself." "Protect yourself from me?" she asked softly, innocently. "Not from you, exactly. From circumstances." He waved a dismissive hand. "Divorces always hurt the man. The women keep everything. I covered my bases." Vesper nodded, committing every damning syllable to memory. The phone in her apron pocket was recording everything, its red digital eye a silent witness. "And the money?" she ventured, her tone carefully neutral. "You said the company was having difficulties, that revenue had dropped." He let out a laugh, a sound loaded with drunken arrogance. "I told you that so you wouldn't ask for more. The company is doing well, very well. I have 3 accounts, 2 official ones, and 1 in the Cayman Islands. I send almost everything there. Saskia showed me. Half her business is in offshore tax havens, too." "You're smart, Vesper," she commented, refilling his glass, watching the level in the bottle sink. "You are always smarter than me in those things." "Of course," he slurred, his ego now fully inflated by the alcohol. "You're a good mother, I don't deny it, but for business, you're useless. That's why you get the minimum, child support and nothing more." She listened, a serene smile fixed on her face, while inside, the cold, calculating core of her turned to solid ice. When the plates were cleared, she played her next card. "Lucian," she began, her voice a model of weary acceptance, "let's do the divorce cleanly. I've known about your mistress for a while. I understand it can't be fixed. I'm prepared. Here are the papers. The lawyer drafted them. We sign them, and tomorrow you leave without formalities." He was surprised, impressed even by her foresight. He took the documents, his vision slightly blurred. The text was dense, legalese weaving a complex web. Lucian, drunk, confident, and utterly distracted, only scanned for keywords. He saw asset division, support, standard phrases. He did not see the devil in the details, the clauses that stipulated a 50-50 split of all assets, the lines where he would acknowledge her non-monetary contribution to the family welfare, the admission that the condo was acquired with commingled funds, including her mother's money. It was in essence a retroactive post-nuptial agreement, a trap disguised as a surrender document. "Give me a pen," he grunted, his signature already a foregone conclusion in his mind. She handed him the expensive fountain pen she'd given her one anniversary. He scrawled his name on the 3 pages with a careless flourish. Vesper took them back, handling the papers as if they were holy writ. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it," he muttered, standing up and swaying. "I'm going to bed. I'm dizzy. The wine." "Lie down on the sofa in the living room," she suggested, her voice soothing. "I'll set everything up for you." She brought a pillow and a soft blanket. Lucian collapsed onto the leather couch, closed his eyes, and within a minute, his breathing deepened into the heavy, rhythmic pattern of drunken sleep. Vesper stood over him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. She looked at the man who had been her partner, the father of her child, now willing to discard them like yesterday's trash. "Sleep, Lucian," she whispered into the quiet room, the words laced with venom he could not hear. "Morning brings wisdom, and you will receive what you deserve." She tucked the blanket around him, an almost maternal gesture that felt like the closing act of a long play, and turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the city lights bleeding through the blinds. Then she moved. The calm facade fell away, replaced with a focused, relentless energy. She retrieved his personal laptop from his office, to which she also knew the password, Langston's birthday. In the blue glow of the screen, her face was a mask of grim determination. She opened his email, her fingers flying over the keys. She searched for contacts, his former business partner, Orion Graves, whom Lucian had betrayed in a massive contract dispute 3 years prior, the internal audit department at Sovereign Trust Bank, and a generic tip line for the IRS. To each, she began crafting and sending emails, her heart a cold, steady drum in her chest. She attached the scanned documents, the financial records, the shell company details, the Cayman account statements. Then, with a deep breath, she attached the audio file from the dinner, the file that contained his drunken, bragging confessions. Send, send, send. The digital arrows flew into the night, carrying his ruin. She finished as the clock on the screen read 3 a.m., the city outside asleep and unaware. She closed the laptop, returned it to its exact place, and went to the bathroom. She washed her face, the water shockingly cold, and looked at her reflection. 33 years old, 12 of them given to this man, this family, this home. And in return, betrayal and a cold, calculated plan for her destitution. But now the calculus had changed. She lay in her bed, in the room that still smelled faintly of him, and for the first time in months, she slept. Not peacefully, but with the deep, exhausted sleep of a general on the eve of a decisive battle. The morning arrived not with a gentle dawn, but with the sharp, insistent ringing of the doorbell. It was 9 a.m. on the dot, Saturday. Lucian was still a groaning lump on the sofa, clutching his head. Vesper, already showered and dressed in crisp, simple clothes, moved through the condo with a surreal calm. She handed him a mug of strong coffee. "They've come for you," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Before he could process her words, she went to the foyer and opened the door. On the threshold stood 3 figures: Octavia Thorne, her attorney, a formidable black woman in a tailored suit holding a leather folder, a man in a process server's uniform, and another with a bank ID badge clipped to his lapel. "Mrs. Vesper Vance?" Octavia asked, though her eyes already knew the answer. "Yes, come in." She opened the door wide, and the 3 entered, their presence immediately sucking the air from the sunlit living room. Lucian, pale and squinting, stumbled into the kitchen doorway. Mr. Lucian Vance, the bank representative, a young man named Charles Foster, began, without preamble, "We have indications of possible irregularities in your corporate accounts, undeclared assets, diversion of funds. We are initiating an audit." "That's all a lie," Lucian croaked, but his protest was weak, drowned by the pounding in his skull. "We have a recording where you admit to these practices," Foster stated calmly, tapping his tablet. Meanwhile, Octavia spread documents on the kitchen table. "Mrs. Vance, here is the asset division agreement signed by your husband last night. It stipulates, among other things, that he acknowledges this residence as community property." Lucian's bloodshot eyes widened in dawning horror. "I was drunk. It doesn't count." "Voluntary intoxication does not invalidate a contract," Octavia replied, her voice a cool legal scalpel. The process server added, "Additionally, your share in the residence and the company is frozen, effective immediately, pending proceedings." Panic, raw and primal, seized Lucian. He lunged for the door, but Vesper was there, a silent, immovable barrier. "Where are you going?" she asked quietly. "To Saskia," he snarled. "Call her," Vesper said, holding out her phone, her gaze relentless. "Tell her you have trouble with the law, that your accounts are frozen. Let's see how fast she runs." With trembling hands, he took the phone and dialed. Saskia answered, her voice sharp with impatience. Lucian spilled his frantic story. There was a long, dead silence on the line. Then her voice returned, icy and final. Lucian, I cannot be associated with someone with legal problems. I have a reputation. Don't call me again. The click of the disconnect was the loudest sound in the room. Vesper watched as the last pillar of his fantasy crumbled to dust. She left you, Vesper stated, the truth hanging in the air like a verdict. At the first sign of trouble. That's true love, isn't it? Defeated, he sank into a chair. What do you want? He whispered, a broken man. Justice, Vesper replied, the words simple and absolute. Octavia laid out the terms: ratify the agreement, pay the compensation, cooperate with authorities, or face a public, scandalous trial that would guarantee criminal charges. Cornered, with no allies and no escape, Lucian capitulated. He signed new documents under the watchful eyes of the interlopers in his home. Vesper, in a final act of symbolic closure, had already packed his suitcase. She placed it by the door. You can go now. He took it, his eyes searching her face as if seeing her for the first time. You've changed, Vesper, he mumbled. You've become hard. No, she corrected, her voice chillingly soft. I just stopped being convenient. To you, that feels like the same thing. The door closed behind him, and the weight that had pressed on Vesper's soul for years seemed to lift, leaving behind a vast, quiet emptiness that was both terrifying and free. The fallout was swift and brutal. Over the following weeks, Lucian's life unraveled completely. His partners, Kingsley and Titus, confronted him with the recording and expelled him from the company, buying out his shares for a pittance. Sovereign Trust Bank froze all operations. Orion Graves, savoring his long-awaited vengeance, forwarded the evidence to the IRS and filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for the old contract betrayal. Lucian found himself living in a rented room in a dismal apartment owned by a down-on-his-luck acquaintance, driving a rideshare car for 14 hours a day just to survive. Notifications from the IRS arrived, detailing a staggering debt of over $6 million, with threats of criminal prosecution for tax fraud. Bankruptcy became his only option, a public, humiliating declaration of total ruin. Vesper, meanwhile, navigated the aftermath with a steady, grim determination. The condo was now half hers, the compensation and child support providing a foundation. She found a job as an administrator at a dental clinic, a modest but steady position that gave her independence and purpose. She renovated the condo, erasing Lucian's aesthetic, and began taking evening literature classes, reclaiming parts of herself she had long forgotten. Months later, on a crisp October evening, their paths crossed one final, unplanned time. Vesper, walking home from the subway, saw him leaning against his worn sedan, a rideshare light glowing on the dash, smoking a cigarette under a street lamp. He looked aged, hollowed out, a ghost of the arrogant man who had packed his suitcase that warm May night. Their eyes met, a flicker of mutual recognition, stripped of love or even hatred, just the acknowledgement of a shared, painful history. Hello, Lucian. Hello, Vesper. They exchanged stiff pleasantries about Langston, about survival. As she turned to leave, he called out, his voice raw. Vesper, have you forgiven me? She paused, the cold air sharp in her lungs. I don't know, she answered honestly, looking back at the shell of the man she had once loved. Maybe someday, maybe never, but I'm not angry anymore, and that is already a lot. She walked away, toward the warm lights of her building, toward her son, toward the life she had fought so brutally to save. She did not look back. Behind her, Lucian stubbed out his cigarette, got into his car, and waited for the next ride request, the next fare in a life that had narrowed to a series of endless, lonely transactions. The storm had passed. The wreckage was clear, and in the quiet aftermath, two very different futures stretched out before them, both forged in the fire of a single, treacherous night. The silence that settled after their brief, brittle exchange on the street was more profound than any argument. Vesper walked the remaining block to her building, the crisp autumn air stinging her cheeks, not from the cold, but from the sheer, surreal tension of the encounter. She could still see him in her mind's eye, the defeated slope of his shoulders, the gauntness of his face in the harsh sodium light. It was the face of a man who had stared into the abyss of his own making and found it staring back. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of the old sympathy, the ingrained habit of caring for him, tried to surface. She ruthlessly shoved it down. Compassion was a luxury she could not afford. It was a gateway back to vulnerability, and she had built her new life on a foundation of hardened resolve. Upstairs, the condo welcomed her with its quiet, curated peace. The scent of lemon polish and the faint, clean aroma of Langston's soap replaced the memory of Lucian's sandalwood cologne. She checked on her son, finding him asleep, one arm flung over his forehead, his math textbook lying open on the comforter. She carefully closed the book, marked his page, and smoothed his hair. This was her truth, her anchor. This quiet safety was what her calculated war had purchased. The following Saturday, she stood on the sidelines of a muddy soccer field at Tenny Park, a thermos of hot coffee in her hands. Langston, a streak of blue jersey and focused intensity, darted across the pitch. Vesper's eyes scanned the small crowd of parents and, finding him, briefly paused. Lucian stood apart, near the chain-link fence at the far end. He was wearing a clean but cheap-looking jacket, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wasn't cheering, just watching, his gaze fixed on their son with a hunger that was painful to witness. Langston, after a particularly clever pass that led to a goal, glanced toward the familiar sideline where Vesper stood, waving. Then his eyes traveled and found his father. The boy's triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a complex, unreadable expression, a mix of pride, confusion, and lingering hurt. He gave a small, tentative nod in Lucian's direction. Lucian's hand emerged from his pocket and offered a stiff, awkward wave back. It was a fragile thread, but it was a connection. Vesper felt a knot tighten in her stomach, not of jealousy, but of a profound, weary caution. She had won the battle for their material survival, but the emotional minefield of a father and son's fractured relationship was territory she could not control. After the game, Langston, mud-splattered and glowing with exertion, ran to her. "Did you see my assist, Mom?" "It was brilliant, love," she said, wrapping him in a hug, ignoring the dirt. As they gathered his gear, Lucian approached slowly, as one might approach a skittish animal. "Hey, champ," he said, his voice rough. "Great game." "Thanks," Langston mumbled, looking down at his cleats. An excruciating silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "I was wondering," Lucian ventured, his eyes flicking to Vesper, seeking permission, a habit that felt alien coming from him. "If it's okay, maybe I could take you for a burger, just to talk." Langston looked up at Vesper, his eyes wide with a silent question. She saw the hope there, fragile as a soap bubble, and knew she could not be the one to pop it. "It's up to you, Langston," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I can pick you up after." The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She watched them walk away together, Lucian's hand hovering near Langston's back but not touching, two figures navigating a new and awkward geography. The sight sent a complex pang through her, relief that Langston might find some healing, and a deep, unsettling fear that Lucian's toxicity, even in its diminished state, could still cause harm. She drove home alone, the empty passenger seat a stark reminder of how her world had permanently shifted. The fragile rapprochement between father and son became a bi-weekly ritual. Lucian, to his credit, was consistently present. He showed up on time, his borrowed car clean, his conversations with Langston focused on school, soccer, movies, safe, neutral ground. He never missed a child support payment, the automated transfers a cold, digital echo of his former promises. Vesper monitored it all from a distance, through Langston's guarded but gradually softening reports. "Dad says driving all day makes his back hurt. Dad helped me with my science project on bridges. He still knows a lot about that stuff." The word dad was re-entering Langston's vocabulary with less hesitancy. Meanwhile, Vesper's own life began to tentatively bloom in the spaces carved out by her hard-won stability. Her job at the dental clinic was more than just a paycheck. It was a source of identity. Dr. Burke, impressed by her meticulous organization and calm demeanor with anxious patients, offered her a promotion to office manager with a salary increase that made her breath catch. For the first time, she opened her own retirement account, the act feeling more empowering than any signed legal document. And there was Paul, Octavia's brother. Their theater outing had been pleasantly free of pressure, full of easy conversation and shared laughter. He was a calm harbor after a hurricane, steady, kind, and respectful of the walls she still kept so high. They began seeing each other casually, for coffee, for walks in the park. He never pressed, never asked about Lucian beyond a general, "Is everything okay with the co-parenting?" His patience was a balm. One evening, as they shared a bottle of wine on their balcony, the city lights spread out below them like a field of fallen stars. He reached over and took her hand. His touch was warm, gentle. "You're remarkable, Vesper," he said softly. I want you to know I see that." She didn't pull away. She let the warmth of his hand seep into hers, a sensation that was foreign, yet not unwelcome. It felt like a door, long rusted shut, groaning open just a crack. This delicate equilibrium was shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Vesper was working late, finalizing the clinic's new insurance billing protocols. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a patient, she answered professionally. "Vesper Vance speaking." The voice on the other end was male, slurred, and thick with an emotion she couldn't immediately place. Despair or rage, or both. You think you're so smart, don't you?" Her blood turned to ice. It was Lucian, but a Lucian she had never heard before, unmoored and dangerous. "You ruined everything. Everything." "Lucian, are you drunk?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes darting around the empty office.
"What do you want?" "I want my life back," he screamed into the phone, the sound ragged. "I'm nothing because of you. I'm in a hell of your making. Saskia's married some real estate mogul. Orion's lawsuit, the bankruptcy trustee is taking the last of it. I have nothing." The self-pity was bottomless, but beneath it ran a terrifying current of blame directed solely at her. "You did this to yourself, Lucian," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, legal, like Octavia's. "Every choice was yours." "My choice?" he hissed. "You set a trap. You recorded me. You sent those emails. You turned everyone against me. You took my son." The last word was a howl of pure anguish. "Langston is not a possession," she shot back, fear now giving way to a fierce, protective anger. "He is a child who needed his father to act like one. You failed him long before I ever fought back." There was a long, heavy silence, broken only by his ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a low, venomous whisper that was far more frightening than his shouts. "You have it all now, don't you? The condo, the nice job, probably some new guy, living the good life on the ashes of mine." The threat was implicit, humming down the line. "If you come near me or near Langston in any state that isn't sober and stable, I will call the police, and I will have the visitation agreement revoked so fast it will make your head spin," she stated, every word a shard of ice. "Try me, Lucian. See what happens." She ended the call, her hands trembling violently. She immediately dialed Octavia, who listened grimly. "It's a classic spiral," Octavia said. "The full weight of his consequences is settling in. This is when people become unpredictable. Document this call. If he shows up, do not engage. Call 911 first, me second." The next 2 days were nerve-wracking. Vesper jumped at every sound in her building's hallway. She arranged for a colleague to walk her to her car after work. She watched Langston like a hawk, her mind torturing her with images of Lucian lurking outside the school. But he didn't appear. The storm, it seemed, had been contained to that one poisonous phone call. Langston's scheduled weekend with his father arrived. Vesper's stomach was a knot of dread as she helped him pack his overnight bag. "Is Dad okay?" Langston asked, picking up on her tension. "He's had a hard time lately," she said, choosing her words with extreme care. "Just, if anything feels weird or wrong, you call me immediately, okay? No matter what." Langston nodded, his young face solemn. Lucian arrived to pick him up looking like a man who had been through a war. His eyes were bloodshot, but he was sober, his clothes neat. He looked directly at Vesper, and in his gaze she saw the shattered remnants of his pride and something else, a bleak, exhausted acceptance. "I'm sorry," he said, the words so quiet she almost didn't hear them. "For the call. It won't happen again." He didn't elaborate, didn't try to justify. He simply took Langston's bag and ushered their son to the car, his movements heavy with a defeat that seemed final. When Langston returned on Sunday evening, he was quiet but not upset. "Dad was really tired," he reported. "We just watched movies and ordered pizza. He fell asleep on the couch before I did." The anticlimax was its own kind of unsettling relief. The violent outburst had given way to a numb depression. In a strange way, the latter felt more permanent and perhaps safer. Winter deepened, casting the city in a monochrome palette of gray skies and bare branches. The incident with the phone call faded, becoming a dark bookmark in the past. But its lesson was indelible. The man she had married was gone, but the consequences of his actions, and her own, would ripple forward indefinitely. Her relationship with Paul deepened slowly, in increments of trust. He met Langston one afternoon for hot chocolate, and the two chatted easily about video games and soccer. Seeing them together, a healthy, uncomplicated male presence in her son's life, filled Vesper with a gratitude that was almost painful. Then, in the stark quiet of a January morning, her phone buzzed with a notification from a local news app. The headline was innocuous: "Former local businessman sentenced in tax fraud case." Her thumb hovered over the screen, a cold premonition settling in her chest. She clicked. There was his name. Lucian Vance, having pled guilty to reduced charges in a deal with the IRS, sentenced to 6 months in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 3 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. A grainy old photo from his company website accompanied the article. The confident, smiling man he used to be, a cruel juxtaposition to the text detailing his fall. She sat at her kitchen table, the steam from her coffee curling into the still air. There was no triumph, only a hollow, aching sadness for the wasted potential, for the father Langston would now have to explain to his friends, for the long, hard road of public shame that still lay ahead of him. She knew she should feel vindicated. The law confirmed the truth of what she'd uncovered, but all she felt was weary. When Langston came padding into the kitchen for breakfast, rubbing sleep from his eyes, she knew she had to tell him. She sat him down, her voice gentle but direct. "There's something about your dad in the news, honey. He had a hard time lately. He made some very big mistakes with money and the law. He's going to have to go away for a little while to deal with the consequences." His boy's cereal spoon hovered midair. "Like jail?" he asked, his voice small. "A kind of jail, yes, but not a dangerous one. It's a place for people who did what he did." The boy's face crumpled, not into tears, but into a profound, weary understanding that no child should possess. "So he's really paying for it," he said softly. "Yeah, kiddo," Vesper sighed, pulling him into a hug. "He really is." The day Lucian was scheduled to report to the facility, a thin envelope arrived in Vesper's mailbox. Her name was written in his familiar, sharp handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of plain paper. "Vesper, by the time you read this, I'll be where I deserve to be. Don't think this is an apology.
I owe you too many to fit on a page. This is just an acknowledgement. You were right about everything. I was a coward and a thief. I stole from the company, from the government, and worst of all, I tried to steal a future from you and Langston. The person you defeated that night wasn't the man you married. That man was already gone, rotted out from the inside by greed and a pathetic need to be something I thought was more. You didn't destroy my life. You just held up a mirror to the destruction I had already wrought. Langston is the best thing I ever had a hand in creating. Tell him I'm sorry I'm not the dad he needed, and tell him that his mother is the strongest person I have ever known. He's safe with you. He always was. L.
She folded the letter carefully, her fingers steady. She placed it in a drawer in her desk, not as a treasure, but as evidence, a piece of the long, painful trial that was now, finally, entering a new phase. She looked out the window at the leaden sky. Somewhere, he was being processed, fingerprinted, stripped of his last vestiges of control. Her war was over. His punishment, at least the part meted out by the state, had begun. But life, her life, was not about endings. It was about continuations. That evening, Paul was coming over for dinner. Langston was excited to show him a new video game. She had a recipe for lasagna she wanted to try. As she moved through her kitchen, gathering ingredients, the ghost of that May evening felt distant, almost like a story that had happened to someone else. The suspense was gone, the immediate danger past. What remained was the quiet, intense drama of rebuilding, of watching her son heal, of learning to trust a good man's touch, of waking up each morning in a home that was truly hers. The future was no longer a fearful question mark, but a blank page she was finally, tentatively, ready to write upon, one cautious, hopeful word at a time. The past had been a prison of someone else's design. The present was a house she had built with her own two hands. And for now, that was more than enough. The winter hardened its grip on the city, turning the world outside Vesper's window into a study in monochrome: dirty snow, gray concrete, skeletal trees. The letter from Lucian remained in her desk drawer, a cold paper ghost. She did not take it out again, but its presence was a subtle weight, a reminder that the past, while legally and physically confined, was not yet fully entombed. Langston processed the news of his father's incarceration with a stoicism that worried her more than tears would have. He threw himself into school and soccer with a fierce, almost frantic energy, as if trying to outrun a shadow. He stopped mentioning his father entirely, and Vesper, following his lead, did not bring him up. Their life developed a new, slightly brittle rhythm, punctuated by Paul's increasingly regular presence. Paul was a study in quiet consistency. He never asked about the letter, about Lucian's sentencing, about the tension he must have sensed humming beneath the surface of their orderly home. He simply existed within it, a calm, grounding force. He helped Langston build a model rocket for a science fair, his engineer's mind meticulous and patient. He brought Vesper a rare, out-of-print collection of poetry he'd stumbled upon in a used bookstore simply because a line in it had reminded of her. His courtship was not one of grand gestures, but of profound attentiveness. One evening in late February, as a sleety rain tapped against the windows, they were on the couch, Langston asleep in his room, a documentary murmuring on the television. Paul's arm was around her, his thumb absently tracing circles on her sleeve. "You know," he said quietly, his eyes on the screen, but his attention entirely on her, "you don't have to have it all figured out. The past, the future, all of it. It's okay to just be here, in this quiet." The simplicity of the permission unlocked something tight in her chest. She leaned her head against his shoulder, allowing herself for perhaps the first time since that fateful dinner to truly rest her weight on another person. It was a surrender, not of weakness, but of choice. In that moment, the last vestige of the cold, calculating strategist she'd been forced to become softened at the edges. The ice had done its job. It had preserved her core through the long freeze. Now, tentatively, a thaw was beginning.
Spring arrived with a tentative gentleness. The first crocuses pushed through the thawing earth in the park, and Langston's birthday approached. He wanted a party, not at home, but at an indoor trampoline park with a few close friends. As Vesper filled out the online booking form, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an automated email from the State Corrections Department's Victim Notification Service, a service she had registered for months ago and half forgotten. The subject line was stark: Inmate Status Update. Her breath hitched. Clicking it open, she read the terse, bureaucratic language. Inmate Vance, Lucian, 78492, has been approved for a work release program effective April 15th. He will be assigned to a community service detail with the Department of Public Works, Parks Division. He wouldn't be free, not truly. He would spend his nights back in the facility, but his days would be spent in the city, wearing an orange vest, picking up litter, raking leaves. He would be visible. The carefully constructed piece of the last few months shuddered. This was not part of her mental calculation. Prison was a closed door. Work release was a door ajar, a crack through which the unpredictable could seep. She immediately called Octavia. It's standard for nonviolent offenders with good behavior, Octavia explained pragmatically. The terms are strict. He'll be supervised, ankle monitored during his hours out. He has no say in his assignments. The chances of him being anywhere near your neighborhood or Langston School are astronomically small, but they're not zero. Octavia paused. Do you want to file a request for a geographic restriction? We can try to keep his detail confined to a specific borough. She thought about it, the old instincts rising: control, preemption, defense. But she also thought of Langston's silent processing, of the need for some eventual stable understanding. No, she said, finally, surprising herself. No, let it be. But if there's even a hint of a violation, then we come down with the full weight of the system, Octavia finished. Understood. April 15th came and went without incident. Vesper found herself scanning the faces of city workers whenever she drove through a park, her heart doing a nervous double-take at every glimpse of an orange vest, only to settle when the face beneath the hard hat was not his. It was a low-grade, persistent anxiety, a background hum to her days. Langston, unaware of this new development, seemed to be emerging from his shell. His birthday party was a raucous, sugar-fueled success. As she watched him laugh, face flushed with joy as he bounced with his friends, she felt a fierce, protective love swell within her. This was what she had fought for. This unguarded happiness. A week after the party, she was leaving the dental clinic later than usual. Dr. Burke had asked her to stay and review a new software implementation. Dusk was settling, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. She decided to cut through Callaway Park, a pleasant, tree-lined square 2 blocks from her building, to clear her head. The park was nearly empty, just a couple walking a dog and an older man feeding pigeons. And then she saw him. He was about 50 yards away, near a flower bed just beginning to show green shoots. He wore a bright orange vest over a drab gray correctional uniform, his head down as he used a claw grabber to pluck discarded wrappers and bottles from the mulch. A portly corrections officer sat near a bench, scrolling on his phone, paying minimal attention. Lucian moved with a slow, deliberate fatigue, a man performing a mundane penance. He hadn't seen her. Vesper froze, her hand tightening on the strap of her laptop bag. Every cell in her body screamed at her to turn around, to walk the long way home, to avoid this collision of worlds. But her feet remained rooted. She watched him. This was the reality of his consequence, not a headline or a letter, but the weary public drudgery of it. The sharp, commanding businessman was utterly gone. In his place was a man diminished, his edges softened by exhaustion and humility. After a moment, as if sensing a gaze upon him, he straightened slowly, a hand going to the small of his back. His eyes swept the park and locked onto hers. Time seemed to distort. The chatter of the pigeons, the distant traffic, it all faded into a muffled roar. He did not wave, did not smile, did not approach. He simply stood there, the grabber hanging limp at his side, and looked at her. There was no anger in his face, no plea, no recognizable emotion at all. It was the blank, weathered look of a shipwreck survivor washed up on a strange shore. The corrections officer, noticing he'd stopped working, barked, "Keep moving, Vance!" Lucian flinched, a small, reflexive jerk, dropped his eyes, and returned to his task, his movements now slightly quicker, more robotic. Vesper turned and walked out of the park, her legs carrying her on autopilot. She didn't run, but her pace was swift, purposeful. She didn't look back. When she reached her building, the familiar lobby smelling of lemon cleaner and floor polish, she leaned against the wall inside her front door, breathing deeply. The encounter had been wordless, lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt seismic. She had seen the ghost, and the ghost had seen her. The abstract idea of his punishment had become flesh, and it was neither satisfying nor horrifying. It was just sad. A profound, wasted sadness. That night, after Langston was in bed, she told Paul about it. They were at her kitchen table, the remains of takeout between them. She described the orange vest, the blank look, the officer's bark. Paul listened, his hands folded around his tea mug. "How do you feel?" he asked, his questions simple and deep. She thought for a long time. "I feel like I can finally stop waiting for the other shoe to drop," she said slowly, the realization dawning even as she spoke the words. He's not a threat anymore. He's just a man who made catastrophic choices and is living inside the echo of them. Seeing him like that, it makes him real in a way he hasn't been since that night. Not a monster, not a victim, just a broken man paying his debt. And my debt to him, to that part of my life, it feels paid. Paul reached across the table and took her hand. "Then maybe that's a kind of closure," he said. "Not a neat one, but a real one. The seasons turned once more. Lucian's work release term ended, and he transitioned to full probation. The automated notifications stopped. Langston, now 11 and on the cusp of adolescence, began to ask more nuanced questions. Is Dad ever going to live in a normal house again? Will he always have that probation officer? Vesper answered as honestly as she could, focusing on actions and consequences, not on character. She never mentioned the day in the park. One Saturday in early summer, Lucian, now permitted longer unsupervised visits, took Langston to a baseball game. When Langston returned, he was quieter than usual. Later, as Vesper tidied up the living room, she found a small, crumpled napkin from the stadium on the coffee table. Unfolding it, she saw shaky block letters written in blue ink, clearly penned in a hurry. "I'm trying. Thank you for today." It was unsigned, but she knew. It was a message for her, passed through their son. She smoothed the napkin, her thumb tracing the words. "I'm trying." It was the most honest thing he'd ever given her. She didn't keep it, she threw it away, but she acknowledged it, silently, to herself. Acknowledgement was all she had left to give. Her life with Paul deepened, moving from careful dating into a committed, serene partnership. He never moved in, but his toothbrush had a permanent spot in her bathroom, and a shelf in her closet gradually filled with his clothes. They spoke of a future that involved maybe buying a house with a yard, traveling when Langston was older, a future built on mutual respect and hard-won peace. It was a future she could actually picture, one not born from desperation or strategy, but from slow, careful choice. On the anniversary of that May evening, Vesper did not consciously mark the date, but as she stood at her kitchen window, watching Paul and Langston play a clumsy game of catch on the patch of grass behind her building, the memory arose unbidden. It didn't come with a surge of panic or a chill of triumph. It came as a distant landmark, a dark valley she had traversed. She looked at her son laughing, at Paul's patient smile as he retrieved a wild throw, at the simple, sun-dappled normalcy of the scene. The intensity of the drama was behind her. The suspense had resolved not in a blinding flash, but in the gradual, steady light of ordinary days. The woman who had orchestrated that dinner, who had sent those emails in the dead of night, felt like a separate person, a character from a book she had once read, a necessary warrior for a war that was now over.
The Vesper of today was someone softer, stronger in a different way, with laugh lines beginning to etch the corners of her eyes, and a heart that was no longer a fortified castle, but a home with an open door, selective but not sealed. The past was a closed chapter, its lessons etched into her bones, its ghosts finally laid to rest. The story now was her own to write, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she was eager to see what came next. The summer stretched long and languid, a season of sun-bleached afternoons and the low, contented hum of cicadas that seeped through the screens of Vesper's condo. The encounter in the park had, as Paul intuited, acted as a strange psychic pressure valve. The lurking, formless anxiety that had hummed beneath her newfound stability dissipated, leaving in its wake a calm that felt earned rather than merely enforced. The past was no longer a live wire, it was a buried cable, its presence known, but no longer capable of delivering a shock. Langston, blooming with confidence of impending middle school, began to navigate his relationship with his father with a precocious maturity that both awed and pained Vesper. His visits with Lucian were no longer events shrouded in unspoken tension. They became routine, almost mundane. He would return with stories of helping his dad assemble a wobbly IKEA dresser for his new small apartment, or of eating slightly burnt pancakes Lucian had attempted to make. The narratives were devoid of drama, filled instead with the ordinary frictions and small triumphs of two people relearning each other. Lucian, from all accounts, was a man stripped bare of pretension, of resources, of the ability to promise anything but his presence for a few hours every other weekend. And for Langston, in this new chapter, that pared-down version seemed to be enough.
One afternoon in late July, Vesper received a call from Langston's school counselor. Her heart, still primed for alarm, gave a familiar, painful lurch. But the counselor's voice was warm, not concerned. "Ms. Vance, I'm just calling because Langston submitted a personal essay for a summer reflection project that I found quite moving. He gave permission for me to share it with you. It's about resilience and family." That evening, after Langston was in bed, Vesper opened the emailed attachment. His words, in his earnest, still-evolving script, blurred on the screen as she read. "Resilience is not about being strong all the time. My mom taught me that. It's about knowing when to be hard, like a rock, and when to be flexible, like a willow tree. A few years ago, our family broke. It felt like our house was falling down. My dad made some very big mistakes. He had to go away for a while to learn from them. My mom had to become the rock. She protected us. She made sure we still had a home. It was scary, but she never let me see how scared she was. Now things are different. My dad is back, but he's different too. He's quieter. He listens more. We are building something new, but it's like building with different materials. It's not the same house. It might be a smaller one or one with a different shape. My mom has a new friend, Paul, who is kind and doesn't try to replace anything. He just adds good things, like a new room with a lot of light. So resilience, to me, is my mom being a rock when the storm came. And it's also her letting the willow tree grow again after the storm passed. It's my dad trying to learn how to build something honest, even if it's small. And it's me learning that a family can change shape and still be a family." Vesper sat in the glow of her laptop long after she finished reading, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a profound, shuddering release. Her son saw her. He understood the cost, and he had translated the brutal adult chaos into a child's metaphor of rocks and willow trees. He had given her the greatest gift. Absolution, not from him, but from the fear that her choices had broken him. He was not just surviving, he was integrating, making meaning from the rubble. She printed the essay and placed it in the desk drawer. It lay there now, not far from where Lucian's letter had been, a document of healing to balance the record of pain. A few days later, an official envelope arrived. It was from the county clerk's office. With a steady hand, she opened it.
It was the final decree of divorce, stamped and sealed. The legal journey that had begun with a secretly recorded dinner and a signed trap of a document was now complete. The paper was cold, impersonal, and utterly final. She showed it to Paul that evening. He looked at it, then at her. "How does it feel?" he asked, the same deep, simple question he always asked. "It feels like the period at the end of a very long, run-on sentence, a sentence I wasn't sure would ever end." As if the universe was acknowledging this closure, a new opportunity presented itself. Dr. Burke called her into his office. "Vesper," he began, steepling his fingers, "I've been offered a chance to partner with a practice in Atlanta. I'm taking it, which means this clinic will need a new managing director. I've recommended you to the ownership group. The job is yours if you want it. Substantial raise, full benefits, a say in hiring. You've essentially been doing it for months." The offer hung in the air, glittering and solid. It was a career, a future, a validation of every skill she'd honed in the trenches of her own crisis management. She accepted on the spot. The promotion brought with it a new whirlwind of responsibility: budgets, staffing, strategic planning. It was challenging, exhilarating, and it filled her days with a purpose that was entirely her own. One evening, deep in spreadsheet calculations, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "This is Lucian. I got this number from the approved contact list for Langston. I don't want anything. I just wanted to say I read Langston's essay for school. He showed it to me. He's a good kid, a better kid than I deserved. You did that. Thank you." She stared at the words. There was no manipulation in them, no hidden ask. It was a simple statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a truth he could no longer deny. After a long moment, she typed a reply, her fingers calm. "He is a good kid. He did the work himself. I just gave him the space to." She hit send. It was not forgiveness, not friendship. It was a diplomatic communiqué between two former warring states, establishing a demilitarized zone for the sake of the child they shared. It was enough. With the promotion came a larger office, one with a window that looked out over a small courtyard. She bought a plant for the sill, a sturdy green snake plant that thrived on neglect. It felt like a fitting emblem. One afternoon in early fall, Paul met her at the clinic after work. They were going to look for houses, not with a frantic urgency, but with a curious, hopeful openness. The third one they saw was a craftsman-style bungalow in a neighborhood with wide, tree-lined streets. It had a porch swing, a backyard just big enough for a garden, and a sunny room off the kitchen that Paul immediately said would be perfect for her to use as a study. As they walked through the empty rooms, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood, Vesper could picture it. She could see Langston's bike leaning on the porch, smell bread baking in the kitchen, feel the quiet peace of a Sunday morning in the sunlit study. It was a vision of a future built not on the ashes of the old, but on fresh, clean ground. Standing in the master bedroom, Paul took her hand. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice soft in the empty space. She looked around, not at the plaster walls and the old fixtures, but at the potential. "I think," she said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, "it feels like a beginning." Later that night, back at her condo, as Langston showered and Paul dozed on the couch, Vesper stepped out on the balcony. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of light and shadow. The chill in the air spoke of the coming winter, but it was a clean cold, not the oppressive gray of the previous year. She thought of the long, tortuous path that had led her here, from the terrified housewife in the doorway, to the cold-eyed strategist in the kitchen, to the weary survivor, to the woman she was now, a mother, a professional, a partner, someone whole.
The intense drama was over. The suspense had resolved into the steady, satisfying rhythm of a life being lived well. There would be challenges, of course. Teenage years with Langston, the complexities of blending families if she and Paul took that step, the eternal navigation of co-parenting with Lucian. But these were the normal dramas of human existence, not the life-or-death stakes of before. She had her armor, but she no longer needed to wear it every day. Inside, she heard Langston's laugh as he said something to Paul, and Paul's low, rumbling response. The sound was a melody of simple contentment. Vesper took one last deep breath of the night air, tasting freedom on her tongue. Not the frantic freedom of escape, but the profound, settled freedom of choice, of security, of love that was given, not taken. She turned her back on the glittering, indifferent city and went inside, closing the balcony door firmly on the past and walking into the warm, well-lit present of her own making. The story, her story, was finally her own to tell, and it was no longer a thriller, but something richer, deeper, and infinitely more hers, a story of becoming.